Hi, Susan Athey here. I just wanted to make a couple comments. To start with, at the beginning, Hal mentioned that Google News allows you to remove yourself from Google News without removing yourself from search, and that indeed is a great policy. He may have forgotten the role that Italy played in getting things to that point. Just quoting from an article that I found on Google News, Google resolved a complaint with Italy's Antitrust competition authority. They had faced criticism from publishers which claimed that Google's news service wouldn't display their content on its search engine unless it also appeared on the news page. And they did a settlement where they agreed to stop that practice. And indeed, Google says, we understand there's always room for improvement in our business. So antitrust can indeed play an important role in getting policies to change in a way that's beneficial for the environment. A second comment, we saw a lot of quotes from different machine learning articles. So machine learning is a really cool way of doing statistics. Most economists aren't that familiar with it. If you want to think about what it does, it allows you to take a model and make it more and more granular. So I could figure out what a user wants depending on what country they're in, what city they're in, whether they're on an iPad or an Android device, and so on. And I can take these long queries and I can try to understand them. So he didn't actually provide any evidence from search. So just quoting from a Google paper about their own algorithms, they were looking at, the question they were looking at was their click prediction for ads. And they wanted to understand whether they could sort of save money by not using so much data in the click prediction. They said we were unable to project down lower than several billion features without noticeable loss. So that several billion features means several billion right-hand side variables in the algorithm. So what those features are, and as they describe in their article, they're bigrams, they're pairs of words. So you can think about the pair of words in the query and the pair of words in the ad text and all the combinations of those pairs of words. And so the algorithms really try to understand the match on the basis of those pairs of words. There's lots of pairs of words, and what they're finding is that in this particular context, it's really helpful to learn about more and more pairs of words in order to get the right match.
Okay.
So in this context,
Thank you.
we spin
Would it be possible to keep it a little bit short, please?
Sure. Okay, and just the last comment, we did leave out the publisher side of the market in the discussion. So a lot of the search queries actually come through long-term distribution agreements or syndication agreements. So when you get your Google default on your iPhone or on another phone, or if you see Google default on your browser, that often comes from an agreement, maybe a multi-billion-dollar agreement. So Google spends billions of dollars a year to get those deals. And so that side of the market is really impacted by competition as well, and it's impacted by the scale economies through revenue per search. And so on the FTC memo, the Google executives testified that in fact they bid for the AOL deal, and their quote was that the worst possible thing would be that the scale would go to Bing, even though this is no profit to us.
I'm sorry, would it be possible for you just to let other people, make their own comments? Well, thank you very much.
Can I respond or should I wait?
Yes. Yes, sure.
I'll have a very brief response. The case about the Italian publishers, as the publisher said, we want to be out of the Google News, but not out of search. And we said, well, it's crawled by the same bot. There's no way to do that using robots.txt. So it's a technical issue. We looked into that and we figured out, well, we'll create two bots. One for news and one for text, and we were able to satisfy what the publishers wanted. So at the time, there was no technical standard for doing that with a single bot. And we created one which allows us to do that now. With respect to the issue about data size, all of these numbers are in binary. It's zeros and ones. So when you talk about a billion, it's not as much as it seems. It's not in a 10 scale, it's in a 2 scale. And of course, you want to look at the click-through rates for a query and a keyword pair. Yes. And so it's a big table that says for this query and this keyword, this is the average click-through rate. And then that's supplemented by a number of other predictors. But they aren't measuring things in machine learning, counting by decimals, they're counting by twos. So this billion is not nearly the billion that you think it is.
you. I'll abuse my dominant position and ask myself a question. There are some objections we find in the recent EC statement of objections which have been raised before by the FTC and dropped. Don't you think the fact that, strangely enough, European consumers are Google maniacs with a 90% market share, whereas in the US it's only 60%? How do you explain this? And don't you think the European Commission has been under the impression that 90% is maybe not an abuse, but a very dominant position in itself? And we are back to this approach to competition, that the structural approach, that the market share is by itself, an indication of dominant position.
Is that a question to any of us?
We could get, at least two answers to this.
Okay. I could give two answers just for me. No, actually,
play the devil's advocate.
So one point is, of course, you're talking about query share, not market share, because the queries are provided for free. It should be looking at the advertising side if you really wanted to look at a market. But the second point is more important, and that is we were global from the beginning. We started search in European languages way back in 2000. And as I mentioned, Bing, our nearest competitor, didn't really come out of beta in Germany until 2012, 12 years later. So we invested in making all of our services available in 40 languages in the mid-2000s, and we paid a lot of attention to markets outside the US, and because of that attention, that investment has paid off.
Justus?
I think this has a lot to do with the political economy of antitrust, actually. I mean, the case against Google was heavily driven also, at least in Germany, for example, by Axel Springer, which is the most important media conglomerate in Germany. They tried to get auxiliary copyrights, which they in the very end didn't get at the same time. That may be a coincidence, or not own the largest price comparison site in Germany. So price comparison is also very interesting for them, now that they haven't gotten the auxiliary copyright in the way that they wanted to have it. And I think it's a bit naive to think that the European Commission is completely unpolitical and takes cases just on the merits and the underlying economics and kind of competition law.
Not to mention that your excellent friends from the US are also very active, lobbying the European Commission. Yeah. Okay. Maybe just one other question before we have a nice break and enjoy the sun and the garden. Yes.
Just a very small question. Can you briefly explain the difference between the two cases, the US case and the EU case, if there are?
You mean briefly? It must be 10,000 pages or something, yeah?
Yeah, they're a bit... Okay, they started at the same point with the same 5 issues. The most contentious issue was this question of promoting your own services. The US said that was not a problem, that was not an issue. The EU says that is an issue. And just as one parenthetical remarks, I want to mention the statement of objection says nothing whatsoever about biasing organic search results for Google. It's only about those product listing ads, which are listed with the rest of the ads at the top of the page, as has been true for the last 15 years, since 2000. Ads always went at the top of the page for exactly the reasons I described. This new format for ads also goes to the top of the page, so as not to be confused with the organic search results, and that is, we think, is the appropriate decision from the viewpoint of consumer benefits.
If I remember well, there was also in the FTC case a few elements on Google, using outside reviews.
Right, and that was resolved.
Resolved, yeah. Okay.
And
okay.
I mean, the US case was about 4 issues. One was about patents that had to do with the Motorola acquisition that is not on the European tablet at the moment. Then that was about integrating content from vertical search engines that has been resolved. The third was patents, vertical search engine, and basically taking data used in advertising campaigns on Google onto other websites. So interoperability of data for advertisers. Basically, that has been resolved as well. And the most interesting thing, the search bias, was there was no case in the end when the Federal Trade Commission closed the case. And in Europe, now it's not about search bias in organic search. It's about the particular listings in the, well, there are 2 cases to be exact. There's one about the shopping sites, Google Shopping. So that it's not quite a search bias. It's more that Google Shopping is advertised too prominently, so to say, when you search organically for something on the Google site. So it's a mix, sort of. That's basically, I think the argument is that consumers do not properly recognize that it is advertising in some sense, and that's why it's a search bias in some way. And then there's the other thing, that the Android story, that is that Android is used to leverage market power for Google, for example.
So on this last point, of course, this is a matter of fact. It's very easy to run a survey, to ask people, show me the ad. Is this an ad? Are there ads on this page? We've done that, of course, and consumers are not fooled by any means. 80% of them recognize these as ads.